Okay. Thank you for coming to the to this event on immigration. My name is Tony Payan. I am the director of the Mexico Center, a new center that we have created here at the Baker Institute to deal with issues in the binational relationship. So thank you very much. This is an important event because I think it continues an important conversation that we've had for last year in the United States and certainly in Texas and in Houston. I want to welcome you to this talk, Still Dreaming, My Hopes for the Immigration Reform Bill with Honorable Luis V. Gutierrez. This event hosted here at the Baker Institute, and thank you to the staff for helping us organize this, is on immigration. Immigration reform in the United States has been quite a ride this past year. After the November 2012 election results, there was much optimism about the possibilities that comprehensive immigration reform would pass. This optimism increased even more when the Gang of Eight presented its pillars of immigration reform in late January. Many of us who had been waiting for reform were ecstatic. The June 68-32 vote in the Senate came, and our optimism for a resolution to the immigration plight of the many undocumented residents in this country continued to rise. Then the congressional recess came. The complicated political composition of the House of Representatives set in, and the government shutdown this month dimmed our optimism about the possibilities of seeing immigration reform this year. With the government reopened, however, and the potential debt crisis averted, President Barack Obama has just said that immigration reform is one of his priorities in the remainder of the year. But, of course, President Obama has not explained how he intends to lead this effort, so we are, in some sense, waiting for his leadership. And so, we are frozen in time, indeed, waiting for that window of opportunity for immigration reform to open again and the president to push through. What we do not know is that the window of opportunity, however, is closing. We know that next year is a midterm elections year, and that could complicate the re-election bids of many Republicans who might be held accountable for voting in favor of anything that might look like amnesty for undocumented residents in the United States. Thus, immigration reform might look less palatable to them, and the possibilities of a true bipartisan coalition behind a comprehensive bill could easily fade away. To clarify for us the probability of comprehensive immigration reform, what it looks like today, and what his hopes are for immigration reform, we have the pleasure to host one of the leading voices in this debate, Representative Luis V. Gutierrez, who will in a minute be introduced by Texas Senator Sylvia Garcia. I am confident that we will walk away from this conversation with a better understanding of where we are and where we are headed in this important debate. Now, to introduce Representative Gutierrez, I welcome Texas Senator Sylvia Garcia. The Honorable Senator Sylvia Garcia is the senator for the 16th District in Harris County. She is the 7th woman and the 3rd Hispanic woman to serve in the upper chambers. Previously, she served as director and presiding judge of the Houston Municipal Court System for 5 terms under 2 mayors, and then as the city controller. In 2002, Garcia was elected to the Harris County Commissioner's Court. She was the first Hispanic and first woman to be elected in her own right to the office of County Commissioner. Active in the Houston community, Garcia has received numerous awards for her service on more than 25 community boards and commissions, including the San Jacinto Girl Scouts, the Houston Hispanic Forum, the American Leadership Forum, the Texas Southern University Foundation, and the Hispanic Institute of Hispanic Culture. Garcia has been named Humanitarian of the Year by the National Conference of Communities and Justice and chosen as one of Houston's 25 Power People by the Inside Houston magazine. The Houston Press has also named her Politician of the Year. She earned her bachelor's degree in social work at Texas Woman's University, followed by a JD from Thurgood Marshall School of Law at Texas Southern University. Help me to welcome Senator Garcia, to welcome Representative Gutierrez. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you know, if he would have gone any longer, he was going to start making me feel like I've aged or something. But I really have done all that, but I still look pretty good, right? Well, it is indeed a pleasure for me to introduce an old friend to some of you, although I'm sure that some of you have already been acquainted with him either directly or through the media. 10-term Congressman Luis Gutierrez is frequently in the news as the national leader of the movement for immigrant rights in America. While he lives in Chicago, we are all glad that his family and his city share him with the rest of the nation. Congressman Gutierrez graduated from Northeastern Illinois University with a degree in English and has worked as a teacher, a social worker, a cab driver, a community activist, and as a city official. Representative Gutierrez and his wife, Zoraida, have 2 daughters, Almeida and Jessica, and a grandson, who of course is named Luisito. Congressman Gutierrez has an extensive biography for fighting for the people, and even summarizing it would take hours to recount. So just a few highlights. Congressman Gutierrez was the first Latino to be elected to Congress from the Midwest. Probably at a time we didn't know there was Latinos in the Midwest. And over his 10 terms, he has proven time and time again that he is there to fight for his constituents and for what is right for America. Because of the Congressman's outstanding work on immigration issues, he was appointed chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Immigration Task Force. He is the leading strategist and spokesperson on immigration issues, not just for this caucus, but for the Democratic Party also. He has been at the forefront of the effort to pass historic, bipartisan, comprehensive immigration reform legislation and helped guide the DREAM Act to passage in the House of Representatives in 2010. He is so passionate about immigration reform that he gave up his number 3 position as a ranking member on the prestigious Financial Services Committee in order to serve on the House Judiciary Committee, which has jurisdiction over immigration. In 2009, he led a multi-city tour, including a stop here in Houston, to raise the visibility of the toll of mass deportations on immigrant families and communities. The Familias Unidas, Familias United Tour helped re-energize the fight for immigration reform during the first half of President Obama's first term. Bottom line, when the Congressman Gutierrez speaks on immigration, people listen. They listen to him in the coffee shops, at the taco stands, at Capitol Hill, and on Sunday morning talk shows. From Houston to New York, from California to Florida, Latinos love Luis. They love him because he's one of them and he fights for them. Recently, he added yet one more accomplishment to his list. As has been said already, he is the author of the newly published memoir, Still Dreaming, My Journey from the Barrio to the Capitol Hill. He read a little to us from his book at lunch today, and I can tell you that not only is he an engaging speaker, and you'll see that tonight, he is also a great storyteller. He uses humor to humanize some very difficult topics. Majority Leader Reid has described his book and said, I quote, "Not only is this a gripping personal narrative, but a compelling argument for comprehensive immigration reform. Proof that tenacity is the key that unlocks the American dream." So now, as the government reopens, and President Obama places immigration reform at the forefront of his legislative agenda, we're most honored to welcome back to Houston our friend, our fighter, and outstanding American, Congressman Luis Gutierrez of Chicago, Illinois.
Senadora. Gracias. Gracias. Como decimos allá en el campo, gracias, senadora. Thank you, Senator. Thank you all for being here this evening. So, what I thought we'd do is I'd take some vignettes from the book to kind of give you a sense of the tone of the book, a little sense of me, and then open it up to questions and answers. So we're going to take about a third of the time just reading some stuff, and then 2/3 of the time you asking questions and having a conversation and a dialogue here this evening. Thank you again to Rice University and to the Baker Institute for having me here this evening. And obviously, Sylvia, gracias, mi hermana. Te manda siempre saludos, Zoraida. They're very good friends, my wife and she. So I'm going to read. So when I'm in Puerto Rico and I'm 17 years old, I am preparing for the revolution in Puerto Rico. I am fighting for Puerto Rican independence. Of course, I'm 17. It's the first time I get to vote. All of the youngsters here will have to look this up. When was the first year 18-year-olds could vote? 1972. And I was born in 53, so it's my first election, and I'm getting ready. But I've always felt that part of what you do, not so much in the political, is what you do outside to experience it. So I went copy picking one day. My goal for our day was copy picking was simple. I wanted to pick as many coffee beans as quickly as I could. I wanted to fill my wicker basket with Puerto Rican coffee beans and show the world with my overflowing bounty that our island could provide enough for all of us. My hands flew, beans popped off the vines and into my basket. At my speed, I didn't have much time to monitor the progress of my fellow coffee pickers. But the few times I glanced up, I saw them moving slowly, carefully, examining every plant on the hillside. Obviously, the island natives didn't have the drive and motivation I did to leverage our coffee cultivation into Puerto Rican independence. The older and very patient Puerto Rican farmer who flew a huge Puerto Rican flag in the field at the front of his coffee farm didn't really need 15 or 20 idealistic supporters of independence climbing all over his plants and picking his coffee beans. But by my second year in Puerto Rico, I was an avid disciple of Puerto Rican independence movement. I had become passionately committed to two key goals. The first was to get all my credits in summer school classes, so I could leave Manuel Mendez Isiaga High School behind and move on to the University of Puerto Rico. The second was to spread my belief in independence for Puerto Rico. On that plantation in the hills outside of San Sebastian, I grasped one fact right away. Picking coffee is hard work. I didn't see anyone on the plantation who reminded me of Juan Valdez. The Juan Valdez of television commercials from my childhood was cheerful, handsome Latino guy in beautiful, unruffled white clothes. He charmed suburban moms with a confident smile and a dashing red scarf tied neatly around his neck. His lovable donkey, for those who remember, was almost as handsome as Juan. Both Juan and the donkey had gone missing the day I was picking coffee. I also learned that coffee didn't grow in neatly arranged rows. Juan couldn't have ridden his donkey happily through the field, gathering delicious coffee beans, I thought. Coffee likes the shade and grows on sloping hill. Coffee plants are dense and sturdy. You need to bend over and lean in close to pick the beans. They share their territory with lots of other creatures that like the shade, like snakes and spiders and insects like the abayarde, a particularly vicious, nasty, ant-like creature that stings coffee pickers in Puerto Rico. The footing on the hills is slippery. It's like working on a mini sea slope. After working for an hour, I didn't see any clothes as neatly pressed and clean as those of dashing Juan Valdez. I didn't think the coffee drinkers would have found Juan so lovable that he had been covered with dirt and sweat and constantly knocking spiders off his arms. Still, after an hour or so of working in the Puerto Rican sun, I didn't think anyone could challenge me as the fastest coffee picker in our group. My basket was nearly full, and everyone else was still moving in slow motion. My friends' baskets weren't half as full as mine. When I'd fill my basket to the top a few minutes later, I didn't throw my hands up in the air and shout, "Done," like I'd won a contest on a game show, but that's what I was thinking. Game over, I thought. The kid from Chicago wins. They should have asked this gringo for some copy-picking tips a long time ago. When I told the owner of the farm that I'd filled my basket, he looked impressed. He also looked skeptical. He looked like a man who had picked a lot of coffee beans and knew about how long it should take to fill a wicker basket. But he was curious. The others stopped to watch as well. They seemed surprised that I could have gotten so far ahead of them. People looked at me as though they thought we might be able to patent my coffee-picking technique and save the economy. The coffee farmer looked in my bucket and smiled. He put his hand deep into my wicker basket and let several handfuls fall through his fingers, checking from top to bottom, turning them over with familiarity. The more he looked at my basket, the more amused he seemed to be. He held up a dark red coffee bean for me to examine. When they are ripe, they are red, deep red, maroon. From now on, only pick the red ones, he said. He smiled at me. A smile of tolerance, a smile that said, we can't be too choosy when it comes to our independentista brothers and sisters. You take what you can get. The others in the party all laughed. One woman patted me on the head like a parent consoling a disappointed toddler. Stay away from the green ones, she said. So that's my coffee picking experience in Puerto Rico on Agricultural Day in Puerto Rico. I now want to go to a little bit of the, as we say, there's politics and there's the prose. I want to read you a little bit about the politics in the book to give you a sense of the politics of the book. After years of being an outsider, I'm finally feeling a little more at home in Washington, D.C. as well. On Election Day in 2012, America suddenly woke up to the power of the Latino and immigrant vote. For me, the awakening to the changing face of America was heartening, but it's also frustrating too. Why did it take so long? The Latino electoral storm that hit America in November of 2012 had been gathering for years. It was obvious to anyone paying attention that it was coming. And just as obvious, we should have addressed our community's needs sooner. The Republican Party and a few of my Democratic friends had ignored a lot of thunder and lightning and were left standing in the downpour on Election Day. Now everybody wants an umbrella. It's gratifying to be in the middle of discussion. For years, I was like the guy at the cocktail party who corners everybody and talks about only one thing, on and on until people become uneasy and look for somebody else to come along and change the subject and save them. Don't get stuck with that Gutierrez guy. All he'll do is chatter about immigration, people might say. But now all of a sudden, everybody's talking about it, even the most popular people at the party. That it took so long for people to catch on to the power of the Latino vote and the need for comprehensive immigration reform is frustrating. But that we're almost there is incredibly rewarding. We are about to make history for millions of immigrants who want to be full participants in American society. That is a reason to celebrate. The first week back after the election, in the midst of the din of astonished TV talking heads who were thrilled by their discovery that about 13 million Latinos had voted in the election for President of the United States, many of my colleagues walked up to me and simply said, "Congratulations." I knew I hadn't done anything alone. Activists across the country and organizations that fought, and all of the dreamers and the determination of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus had kept the pressure on. We wouldn't give up. On Election Day, more Latino representatives than ever found their way to Congress, and they came ready to fight for immigrants. Of course, I'm working with my colleagues on that issue I've lived and breathed for almost 2 decades. You know, sometimes I feel like an elder statesman, which reminds me that it's probably time to start some new trouble. Of course, if I want trouble, there's always my relationship with our president, but I'm working on that. Latinos were crucial to Barack Obama's victory. After nearly 4 years of telling me he simply couldn't do much to help immigrants, Obama took bold action for dreamers, and he made all the difference for him and the community. Once he embraced the idea that he could take executive action to protect immigrants, he touted his campaign like it was natural to him as talking about change and hope. He filmed Spanish-language television ads that focused on the dreamers, and he equated their desire to build a better future in America with the very same hopes he has for his daughters. It was powerful stuff, and it worked. Latinos always wanted to be with Barack Obama. He just needed to give them a reason. After he was elected, Barack Obama finally invited the Hispanic caucus back to the White House. We hadn't been there for over a year and a half. He had already announced his strong support for getting comprehensive immigration reform done quickly. Of course, post-election, after Latinos and immigrants had flexed their electoral muscle, everyone was for comprehensive immigration reform, speaking up like kids at a birthday party, arguing over who gets the first piece of cake. Where were all those guys last year, I thought? Or every year for the last 2 decades, for that matter. But now, even John McCain was for comprehensive immigration reform again. At the meeting with the president, Ba Menendez, Javier Becerra, and I, the 3 members of Congress who were most involved in the delicate negotiations to come up with a comprehensive immigration bill that could get some Republican support and pass, asked the president to hold off on introducing his own legislation. It seemed ironic after 4 years of pushing and pleading, but now the game had changed. The president's opportunity to be the sole leader on reform had passed. To get it done, we needed to balance some delicate politics in the House and the Senate. We needed to round up votes. Barack Obama, my friend from Chicago, the man I endorsed before any other Latino member of Congress, looked at us like we were crazy. After 4 years of constantly complaining and not exactly being subtle about it, now you want me to wait? The president responded. Well, yes, we did. See, I have my moments of contention with Barack Obama, but I almost always support him. I frequently disagree with him on one vital issue, but there are a couple of hundred Republican members of Congress who would disagree with him on everything. You know, they would vote against sunlight if it was proposed by Barack Obama. We needed him to be patient so we could get some Republican support. To his credit, even though he complained, he listened to us and he waited. But it was that word he used, subtle, that stuck with me. He was right on immigration. I was never subtle with him. I'm just not very good at subtle. But there's nothing subtle about deportations either. They tear families apart. If you want to stop deportations and help immigrants, sometimes you can't be subtle with powerful people, even a president you want so much to support. It's much easier to stand up. It's much easier to stand up to people in power if you view the ability to confront them as a privilege that shouldn't be wasted. I'm not concerned that the President of the United States might be mad at me. I'm amazed I'm in a position to make the President of the United States mad. After all, I'm the Puerto Rican son of a cab driver and a factory worker, a kid who chopped up pig innards and swept the floor of an unsuccessful restaurant, a guy who had to drive a cab on the night shift to make ends meet. And somehow, 40 years after my dad packed us up and took us on the road, I ended up sitting across the table from the President of the United States negotiating comprehensive immigration reform. And nobody ever stepped in and tapped me on the shoulder to tell me, there's been some terrible mistake, Luis. And that I needed to go back to the apartment in Lincoln Park or San Sebastian. No, I'm still here. So when people tell me I should be a little nicer or try to get along, I think, why? What do I have to lose? I've reached my dreams. Actually, I've done more than a kid sleeping on a cot in a Chicago apartment could ever have imagined dreaming. So it gives you a little sense of the politics and a little of the pros of dealing with the stuff. We have another part. I have many times when people look at the life experience and you read the book of politicians, it just seems to me that there's just things that are hidden. Not that we gave you every secret in the book, but things that are hidden, glossed over, and sometimes. So I wanted to tell everybody a little bit about Zoraida, because I got to tell you that her father, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about her and when I met her, and her dad, Don Juan. So I want to read a little excerpt about Don Juan, Zoraida, my wife's dad. Zoraida was born in Puerto Rico, in Moca, a town not more than 10 miles down the road from San Sebastian. Luis Aguila and I chased around Rubén Berríos out here. Her family was poor too. My mom had once been happy to have a spigot at the bottom of the hill for water. Zoraida remembered taking a bucket to the river when she was little. As their family grew larger, her parents' chances of supporting everybody grew smaller. So her dad packed everyone up and moved them to Chicago. Zoraida grew up in Humboldt Park across the expressway from Lincoln Park, and every story Zoraida told triggered a memory from me. She had to learn English in Chicago when she was little. I had to learn Spanish in San Sebastián in high school. Now her mom was taking her back, and she was going to have to start all over again on the island of Puerto Rico. Several of her 12 brothers and sisters had already returned. Her mom didn't want to say after her dad passed away. Stories about her father were a category where I couldn't match Zoraida. Her dad had raised a family of 13 as the neighborhood bolitero, the man who played their numbers with. Zoraida didn't remember him ever having another job. He raised a baker's dozen kids on hustle and ingenuity. His name was Juan, and everybody in the neighborhood knew him as Don Juan. Everyone knew that Don Juan could get you a bottle of pitorro, that's Puerto Rican moonshine, or find you a card game or give you a small loan if you were short one week. Zoraida loved her dad, his position of respect in the neighborhood, his friendship with everyone they knew. He was a sharp dresser, the best dressed guy around. She rarely saw him without his fedora. You have to look like a man of means, he would tell her. This is a neighborhood service. I talk to our friends and neighbors. They come to me with their problem. Your clothes say a lot about who you are. The neighborhood boliteros were really middlemen. They all worked for the big banker outside of the neighborhood and made their money mostly on tips. When you hit your number, you gave the bolitero a bit of your winnings, a little taste. They made their living on charm and trust. If Grandma Perez forgot to play her regular number one week and it hit, Don Juan would pay her anyway. A gesture of kindness meant more money down the road. When you hit the bolita, it was like a celebration. You could play for a dime, a quarter. You might win $50 or $100. Play $1, and you could win $500. That was real money for you and real money for Don Juan. The police were always hassling the boliteros, but they were like part of our community, no different than the bodega owner or the barber. The bolitero might as well have been the milkman. The police were the outsiders. Zoraida saw the police would talk to his regular guy who played his numbers with, and they would simply say nothing to him. They had never heard of Don Juan. When she got older and the police department finally hired a few Puerto Rican cops, even they would play Don Juan's number, thinking of as natural as buying a candy bar at the store. That still didn't keep the police away from their Humboldt Park apartment. One day, Zoraida heard her brother-in-law yelling from the upstairs apartment. Las cosas están mala, he shouted. Things are bad, he said over and over, a warning in Spanish that the police were coming. They didn't knock, they came in, and Zoraida's older sister, Lucy, asked if they had a search warrant. They waved around some piece of paper, told all the kids to sit down on the couch, and they opened every drawer and lifted every cushion. Zoraida and Lucy just walked. They couldn't find anything until they came to a large pad of paper with very long lines for columns on it. There was nothing else written on it. They asked Lucy what it was. It's my art paper. That's an art project, Lucy told the police. Are you sure? It's for art, Lucy said. The police didn't take anything away that day, but they kept coming back, looking around, never finding anything. One day, Lucy and Zoraida and their mother were at home watching TV. They hadn't had any visits from law enforcement lately, but Don Juan kept telling them that the police were watching closely. A promo for the news came on and said they had breaking news about an arrest in the numbers racket. They watched the news, and together, Lucy was the first to yell, "Oh my God, that's Dad." He and a buddy who drove him around had been arrested, and it led the news. Big break in the Puerto Rican numbers business, the police said. They made it sound like Don Juan was a gangster, a leader in a major organized crime operation. Zoraida told me she was worried and scared, but she was also impressed by how nice her dad looked on TV. He was dressed up in his long coat and hat, and he looked handsome, she thought. They wondered when they would see him again. Their uncle bailed him out, and the police confiscated his friend's car as evidence. That seemed to satisfy the police. Zoraida doesn't remember him going to court, and he never spent a day in jail. To her, it seemed like it was all made up to make the police look good. All the police attention made Don Juan particularly careful. Being a successful bolitero required creativity. Don Juan had lots of different jobs. When they first arrived in Chicago, he was a piragüero. Piragüero was the neighborhood snow cone salesman. Don Juan would get out his wooden cart, buy a big block of ice, set up 5 or 6 syrups for flavors, and sells snow cones. He parked on a corner, and people came to him all day. For Don Juan, being a bolitero was a family business. Sometimes he worked with his brother, Zoraida's uncle, Lorenzo. Together they could cover more territory. Lorenzo had lost a leg to diabetes, so he made his way around the neighborhood on a wooden leg. They were mainstays of Humboldt Park neighborhood, Don Juan and Zoraida's uncle. Her dad, dressed like the hero of a romance novel. His sidekick trying to keep up with him on his one good leg. The leg was also storage. Her uncle would screw off his wooden leg and put the numbers and money inside, a nice, safe hiding spot. It worked well until one day police stopped them on the sidewalk in front of their house, made him take off his leg and hand it over to them. They shook it side to side, and little slips of paper fluttered all over the sidewalk. A snowfall of Puerto Rican lucky numbers. Even in Lincoln Park, we thought the police should just leave the boliteros alone. They were just entrepreneurs. It was part of Puerto Rican culture, no different than church bingo. But the police kept hassling them anyway, right up until the time the government decided to take over the business. It wasn't the police who put the boliteros out of business. It was the lottery, a state-sanctioned and mandated numbers racket. When the lottery came to Illinois, I remember thinking that Don Juan now officially was a man before his time. A neighborhood businessman with an idea so good that the state of Illinois was going to use it to fund public education. So I tried to describe what it's like growing up in a Puerto Rican neighborhood and who you meet and who you are. And this is who we were. Her dad a bolitero, my dad a cab driver. Working in a factory, her mom trying to raise 13 kids. I wanted to describe a little bit about the politics between the president and I. And so I read to you from the final chapter of the book. There are many more instances and exchanges between the president and me as we develop our relationship over the years. And there are many other vignettes and anecdotes of my life growing up. Here's what I think. I think if you're going to write, this is my opinion. It isn't the way I suggest everybody do it. But I like to sit down with people. Maybe you do too. And maybe it's over dinner. Maybe you're having a glass of wine or, I don't know, whatever it is your favorite drink is. And you sit down and you talk with your friends about grade school. What do? You usually laugh. Even in high school, I could talk to my friends and even we can laugh about the girl that didn't go to the prom with them, right? We think back and we talk and we always bring back our memories and we bring back some laughter, even in the saddest moments. So I wanted to write a memoir that was conversational. So I wrote it in a way as though I was speaking to you on a Friday night and we were having a couple of drinks and I was telling you a story. I think that way some of the authenticity comes through. And in being that, sometimes you laugh and sometimes you cry. But in the end, you learn the experience and what it is that forms me and informs me about who I am today. When I end and say, what have I got to lose? My mom and dad came to New York in 1952. The banner headlines in New York City were Puerto Ricans arrive bringing tropical diseases. We need to contain them. I know some of you, that's going to sound like hyperbole, but that's what it said. They said that Puerto Ricans came because we wanted to be on welfare, we were criminals, and we were lazy. And we would never learn English. That we were foreigners. Of course, Puerto Ricans have been citizens of the United States since 1917. We had fought in the First War, the Second, and in Korea. We could spend the whole evening talking about the contributions of Puerto Ricans to the armed forces of the United States, much like Mexicans in the state of Texas. And so that's where my dad and my mom, that's the reality that they lived. And they grew up, and I grew up in a time, everybody thinks, well, you grew up in the North. Listen, in my neighborhood, there were swimming pools, there were beaches, there were restaurants, there were neighborhoods that may not have said whites only, but you knew better. you knew better. You didn't have to have a sign. Experience taught you not to enter those areas. In 63, 10 years after I was born, they passed the Civil Rights Act. And 2 years later, the Voting Rights Act. Look, I'm a reflection of a movement, of a time. And what I want to do in the Congress of the United States is honor my mom and my dad and all of the immigrants that came before them and struggled against racism and bigotry and prejudice, and to all of those in the black community who gave so much in the civil rights movement so that I could have a voice in the Congress of the United States. If they don't fight and they don't change America for the better, I would not have the opportunity I have today in the Congress of the United States. And we should honor those people that fought so that we could all live in a freer, better America. That's what I attempt to do in the Congress of the United States. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Let me moderate the
Sure.
questions so that we can measure the time. I know you have a flight tonight. We have about 25 minutes, I think, for the discussion. Anybody has questions back there?
Congressman, you were part of the Gang of Eight, then became part of the Gang of Seven. You worked with two Texas Congressmen, Carter and Johnson. In the end, that fell, and of course, you're going your separate bill strategy that Speaker Boehner has outlined. And reflection, was there some way you could have kept the Gang of Eight together and kept Labrador and others so that if you had presented a joint bill, maybe you would have had more progress in your House?
You know, I can't speak in great detail because we haven't finished the process. But I think it would be worthy of much discussion and debate and analysis when the bill is signed, so that everybody could come to understand this process. I will say this. Boehner never gave the Republicans that were negotiating with me and Javier and others the kind of support that they needed. If you're going to send 4 Republicans into a room with 4 Democrats, you got to support them. You got to say, those are my agents for change. I'm sending them in to negotiate. If you leave them and they get attacked and they don't get supported, you shouldn't be surprised that they walk away from the process, number one. On the other hand, I think there were some Democrats who, Democrats approached negotiating with Republicans on comprehensive immigration reform in the House as though we were in the majority. We're not. You may be right, but you're in the minority. And Republicans responded many times thinking they were only in the majority. You know what? They might be in the majority, but they're also wrong because they lost the referendum on immigration on November 6th. And somehow we need to reconcile those two things. Lastly, and will have me back, and I assure you we can talk about all of the things that we went through. But don't think that Republicans are all bad and Democrats are all good. Let me tell you, there's human frailty and weaknesses that abound in every party in the Congress of the United States. And one day, hopefully, we can write and talk about that. But I think we still have an opportunity. I'm happy and delighted that the President of the United States said that they can do it in a piecemeal process. That they can do one bill on the Dreamers, another bill on the STEM program, another bill on border security, and that they can do that. In the end, what do you want? You want the full menu. I mean, we cannot dictate. To me, it's like, I don't get it. How do Democrats go to a Republican majority, almost and say, I want you to do it this way? Well, guess what? They got the gavel. They control the committees. They won the election. You may not like it, but they're in charge. Negotiate with them like they're in charge. Because when we're in charge, we don't call the Republicans and ask them their opinion on how we should proceed. We don't. We don't say, oh my God, let's give them more time on the House floor so their position can be clearer. Maybe there can be some more transparency. That doesn't happen. Power doesn't yield anything to its opposition. On this issue, this is a human rights issue, this is a civil rights issue. We should deal with it as one and put politics. So I'm happy. So they're going to do it that way. You know what the good thing is? That after the Gang of Eight fell apart, Chairman Goodlatte from Virginia said, I'm going to proceed and I'm going to bring a bill on comprehensive immigration reform that can take us to conference anyways. That's good news. You may not like what he takes to conference, but you know what? If you have the votes, then you have the votes. Let's get to conference, because the worst thing we could do is allow all of the election results last November and all of the work in the Senate to be for naught. Because I'm going to tell you something. We don't do it in the next year and a half. Do not think that in the next 2 years, the Senate's going to take up the issue and pass it again. It will not happen. And every day, 1,100 people are deported. Since the Senate bill was passed in June, 100,000 people have been deported. Most of whom would have qualified for legalization under the Senate bill. It's a shame. So we're each responsible. The president does all the deporting, and the Republicans do almost all of the obstruction. And so we have to find a way to resolve that, and I think we will. I really believe it is. The force for justice is inevitable. I say that here to you today, confident that I can come back in a year and a comprehensive immigration bill will be signed by the President of the United States.
Other questions?
I have one question. You were here last spring with Congressman Al Green.
Yes.
At the Luby's restaurant on
Yes.
4th Street. And compared to that time to now, how much less or more optimistic are you that we'll eventually have something?
I'm more optimistic.
Good. And why?
Because I get to sit down quietly with Republicans every day. And in sitting down quietly with them, I get to see their true nature. I share with a smaller group. I won't share with this group in a broader. But there was a Republican congressman that on Good Friday called me up. Very conservative Republican congressman. I don't know how many of you remember that Congressman Young of Alaska, in referring to his dad potato farm in California, said, well, we used to just round up 40, 50 wetbacks and they'd pick the crops for us. He said that as cavalierly as saying, you know, it was raining that day. It was very hurtful. Now, of course, he was condemned by Boehner and all the Republican leadership. I mean, the Democrats didn't even get a chance at beating him up. No, but that's a positive thing. They're taking care of their own and putting them in their place. Before, we did have to stand up. But they are more intolerant of those kinds of expressions. That's a good thing. So that's a positive. That's what makes me more positive. They're bringing in their own, number one. Number two, a very conservative Republican congressman called me up, and it was Good Friday. And I know about his deep religious belief, Christian. And he called me up, and he said, Luis, I'm calling you up today on Good Friday. I said, no, this is such a solemn day for both of us, a day of reflection for both of us in the year as we go towards Easter. And he said, I called you to say I'm sorry. I cannot imagine how hurtful Congressman Young's comments were. And I wanted to say to you, I'm sorry. Make of it what you wish. But there was a man 1,000 miles away who did not utter those words, but felt that he had to assume responsibility. And that speaks volumes. Look, we need to stop demonizing one another. Especially, look, I'm not going to vote for Ryan's budget. It's not what I went to Congress. It doesn't reflect what I think our budget priorities can. But when he stands with me in Chicago and says, I'm for comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship, we shouldn't all frown on that. But here's what happens. You know, bipartisanship, it is much lauded, but very infrequently rewarded or applauded. And yet it is what we need, especially on issues as controversial as comprehensive immigration reform. I went back to the Democratic caucus and everybody's like, why are you with them? We got to take back the majority, Democrats would say to me. Really? I thought we had to stop the deportation and make this a better country for everybody. I would say quietly to myself. Yeah, sometimes even I'm restraintful for the immigrants. And what did Paul Ryan get? Hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on negative ads, bombarded every day by very conservative talk radio people. That's what he got. You know, we have to learn. I'm happy, you know, that Zuckerberg from Facebook, you know what he did? He spent $1 million during August defending Paul Ryan. I'm happy he put that money in that place. Because look, guys, for those of you who are Democrats, there are only 201 of us. And not all of us are going to vote for comprehensive immigration reform. And it takes 218 votes to pass legislation in the House of Representatives. You need the other side to be successful. Another question, I'm sorry.
What would you say is the biggest difference between your hopes for the immigration reform bill and what you believe is actually going to be signed into law?
And there is going to be a difference. There is going to be a difference because we're not in charge. Regrettably, this is true. Democrats were in charge in 2007 and 2008. But they didn't want to spend any political capital because they said, our blue dog, our conservative Democrats will lose elections. We were 245, 250 strong. Why didn't we gather 218 votes and pass comprehensive immigration reform? Why? We didn't do it in 2009 or 2010. We controlled the Senate and we controlled the House. And we had the President of the United States. So look, you have to look at this in perspective. When we were in charge, we didn't want to lose anything. We didn't want to expend the political capital it would take because it just wasn't that important enough. Not to me, but to others. So now we have Republicans in charge. So dynamics are going to change. If when you had a great opportunity and you were in charge, you didn't do it, and now you're in the minority in the House of Representatives, you're not going to get as much. That's just the way of politics. Let me tell you, not what I think, but a story that I believe we should reflect upon as we move forward. Number one, I think that in the end, there will be millions that will get American citizenship of those that are undocumented today. I think that will happen. So what informs me as I move forward? I gathered about 100 undocumented immigrants in a church in St. Pius. Y le pregunté, ¿qué quieren? What do you want? And you should have heard what they said to me. It would have been very valuable for America to listen to them. Because these are the people we're fighting for, right? The undocumented, because we're all citizens. So we're not getting any improvement out of this. We're here to improve America. And a man got up and he really synthesized what all of the immigrants were saying to me that night. Mira, Luis, eso de la ciudadanía está muy lindo. Pero yo necesito mis papeles. Luis, that thing of citizenship, that's beautiful, but I need papers. He said, every day I fear being deported. He said to me, every day I fear being deported. He said, I don't want to leave my wife and make her a widow. That's what happens if I'm deported. Because I don't think I can get back. And I don't want to make my children orphans. So give me my papers. And then he said something that just lifted my heart, right? Because even though you could tell he was a humble man, maybe of not, a great degree of formal education, he was thinking strategically, right? He said to me, y mis hijos y sus hijos se encargarán con aquellos que me trataron con crueldad. My children and their children will deal with those who treated me with cruelty. But get me my papers. So what informs me? I got to stop the deportations. Because Barack Obama, you heard him, he said he's not going to stop them. And it's 1,100 every day. We can't defend our women in the armed forces of the United States, right? Thousands of documented cases of sexual exploitation of American citizen women in the armed forces of the United States. What do you think happens in the fields to immigrant women every day? We can't protect the ones in the armed forces. People die trying to cross that desert every day, not to get a job in America, just trying to get back to their children. People go to work, they lose a finger, a hand, an eye. They lose their life every day because they're undocumented immigrant, and there's an exploitive employer who exploits it and puts them in harm's way because they know they can get away with it. They do dirty, back-breaking, filthy work in the fields across this country. And every day we go into the grocery store and we see the produce center, and we know that foreign hands pick that produce in our country, foreign hands. But we don't go, we can't eat that. That's illegals who pick that. No, we eat it. And we let Maria make our beds in a hotel room. We're happy to take it. And we see Jose washing the dishes in the back room when we're in a restaurant. All we care about is a decent meal being served to us. We are all accomplices in the exploitation of 11 million people. And it's time we stop deporting them and allow their families. What is this fight all about, if not about the sanctity of families? It drives me crazy in Washington, D.C. that politicians tout their re-election and they give you their children and their wives in beautifully framed pictures and say, I'm a family man, and then do nothing to stop the destruction of immigrant families each and every day in this country. And so to me, and I'm sorry, I usually don't do that, but to me, what informs me is that man and that community. I'm going to fight for everything I can do. But in the end, I'm going to remember my ethics class, and I remember which was the utilitarian approach. I'm going to try to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And then the next day, I'm going to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And eventually, I'm going to die, and we still will not have accomplished justice for everyone. That will be handed out to someone new. Because that's the human condition, right? That somebody has to take it up and improve it for the next person.
Two questions. Could you explain the difference between the George Bush proposed policy, his second term, and presently what's being proposed, and where presently that is a guest worker program? How's that fit in?
I'm going to walk away from the microphone because you all can hear me. This place is acoustically sound, I'm sure, and my voice usually carries everywhere. So that's a great question. I think many of the provisions in 2006 and in 2007, even the ones that failed, are better than many of the provisions in the much touted Senate proposal. If you look at them and you put them, right? And you have to give Bush credit. He sent 2 members of his cabinet, Gutierrez, Secretary of Commerce, and Chertoff, Homeland Security, for a year and a half. When I went to go talk to President Barack Obama, and I said, Mr. President, who's in charge? He said, my chief of staff is. And I said, well, that means nobody's in charge. Nobody's in charge. He had 2 people in charge, 2 cabinet members, and they worked hard. Now that they failed, they failed. He got his rear end beat up a whole lot, George Bush, for trying to be fair to immigrants. He always was. And so in that sense, you have to call it correctly, I think, and say, and so in the end, though, it's a resolution of the problem, right? But let me say a little bit about the next time you hear people saying, we can't stop until everybody has a pathway to citizenship. You've heard that, and you probably say, yeah, and I understand. That's right. We can't stop till everybody has a pathway to citizenship. The Senate bill that was passed and was touted, and that I would vote for today, without hesitation. I would vote for that Senate bill today, without hesitation. National Council of La Raza, you all know who they are. Many of you are members of their affiliates. Evaluated it. That's our think tank. Esa es la gente que nosotros ponemos ahí a pensar. Y a evaluar, right? Those are the people that we sent to Washington to do that. That's why we send them contributions, and we want them so they can evaluate things for us independently, nonpartisan. Aquí no está lo político. This is right. What did they say about the Senate? 3 million of the 11 million not only will not make it to citizenship in the Senate version, they will not make it to legalization. The CBO arrived at exactly the same conclusion. If you're going to go into the Senate proposal, what do we need to understand? You cannot join any of the health care programs with a subsidy. And for a migrant worker, you have to buy Obamacare. You know what Obamacare costs without a subsidy? $12,000, $13,000, $14,000. That's what it costs. Now, fortunately, there are subsidies that reduces it, because that's like your employer contribution, right? I get an employer contribution to government, and so do all municipal workers and county workers and all government. And many of you go to work, and they say you pay $400. I assure you, your employer is picking up the other $800. And that's the way it works. It's always worked that way, and it becomes part of the negotiating process, right? Now unions and governments are negotiating about what? Not so much about salaries anymore, but about who's going to pay how much and under what conditions for health care. So we understand that. But under the Senate proposal, 10 years, you cannot receive a single thing from any means-tested program, and if you do, you're out of the program. If you're unemployed for more than 60 consecutive days, you can be out of the program. You know the tens of billions of dollars, and many of you are lawyers in this room because I've talked to you before. In 1986, under Ronald Reagan's amnesty proposal, you could go back to Social Security and say, I'm Luis Gutierrez. I worked as Luis Gonzalez using this Social Security number. Can you please make an adjustment in my Social Security account and put the last 20 years that I've invested and put it in the right account? And you know what they did? They put it in the right account. You know what they did in the Senate proposal? They confiscated every last dollar that's been contributed by the 11 million to the Social Security Trust Fund. They said, if you want to get legalized, not one penny. Start fresh. Now, you think, well, that's okay, Luis. Well, if you're 50 years old, it might not be okay. You know, it all depends on where you're at in your life. If you're 20, big deal. So understand that there were many concessions made. Siblings, in 10 years, tried to get a brother and a sister into this country as an American citizen. It ain't gonna happen. Diversity visas? Gone. I mean, I'm describing, and I'm telling you about a bill, what? What did I say? Because I want you to understand. I vote for it right now. All I'm trying to say is that in Washington, D.C., what you get and what you hear isn't always what really is.
Absolutely.
Many of you, I bet, in this room didn't realize that all of those were component of the Senate bill. Why? Because everybody's saying it's a great deal. It is. It's bipartisanship. It's what happens. And then para colmo, no, para colmo, after I said all of those things, if that wasn't bad enough, I had to go and vote for a bill that militarizes the border between Mexico and the United States by wasting, they're going to put 20,000 more. Where are they going to house these 20,000 Border Patrol agents? Where are they going to put them? On top of the 20,000 we already got? They we spent 40, and you know where they get the $47 billion? Huh? Esto es el colmo. You know where they get the $47 billion? From the savings. Because if you legalize 11 million people, the Congressional Budget Office says you get $175 billion deficit reduction in the first 10 years. So before they legalized, they already spent 47 billion of it. Hey, there's money. Hay que gastarlo. But not educating people, not making people, you know, better and healthier, right? Not creating new jobs, but on more Border Patrol agents. And who proposed that? The Republicans, in order to get 8 additional votes to get 68. Under the premise, what was the premise of the Democrats in the Senate? If we get a resounding, overwhelming vote, we'll force the House of Representatives to have to take the Senate bill. But it looked like it didn't quite work out like they expected. And then I'm gotta go, and I gotta negotiate as a member of the minority party in the House of Representatives. You already negotiated away all these things. And I'm not saying they were wrong. I'm simply trying to say to you, this is what happens. And this is what we need to do. So when I look at that man, que me dice a mí, búscame mis papeles, get me my papers, you know, and I see what the Senate proposal is like, and I know that 3 million of them ain't gonna make it, maybe I should make it so the other 3 million get a chance. Maybe we should do something to expand the number of people. So that's the big answer to the question. And one, I think we need to be intellectually honest with one another about what it is we're going to get as a community of people for our votes and our energy, and what civil rights means and what human rights protection will actually. But let me just say this. Look, everybody everybody's going to be against whatever I already know this. For everybody who says they like the deal, there are going to be 5 people going to say they don't like the deal. But I assure you, the 5 that say they don't like the bill, very few of them are going to have an order of deportation and separation from their family. And so we're just going to have to step up. Senadora, you know like I know. We propose things, la gente se quejan, but that's what they sent us there. They sent us there to demonstrate leadership, to understand the nuances and the idiosyncrasies, and to make judgments and decisions, and then be held accountable during election time. I will be happy to stand for re-election on the basis of what we get. And if I lose, then that's democracy. But you've got to demonstrate leadership. And you've got to say to yourself, what does the constituency really want? What do they really need? And how much can I get for them? And don't allow perfection to get in the way of a good compromise that helps. We're talking even under the Senate, 8 million. Pathway to citizenship, that's a lot of people. 1,100 get deported every day. Last question, I guess, and then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you. We'll take one more question, and then anybody? Then yes.
Have you ever thought of running for president?
That's very kind of you. Look, here's what I'd like to do. I want to stay and get the bill passed. That's why I left the powerful and influential Financial Services Committee. They call it an exclusive committee. That's if you're on that committee, you can't be on any other. You also have to raise tens of thousands and hundreds of dollars for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, because you're on. I never quite understood that. You get an important committee and then you gotta go to people to give you money because you're on the committee. I wonder who's gonna give you money. Anyways, that's another book, right? The point is this. Well, everything I just said is absolutely true. I'm not kidding about that. That's the way it works. You have a position of leadership and influence, and they want you to go raise money. And I gotta tell you, what I wanna do is I wanna see that happen. And then, as most of us in this room know, as good people on policy, really, we gotta watch after the president signs the bill, all of those bureaucrats and all of those bureaucracies that write what? The regulatory language, right? To make sure that it's expansive and generous and humane as possible. Otherwise, we're going to put 8 million people to hire, lots of lawyers and pay tens of thousands of dollars in fees and be afraid, right? They're going to say, eso no vale la pena. And the first people, I don't want to be president. You know what I want to do? I want to grab the first person, right? Okay, maybe he's a little trepidation, he's a little fearful, and say, come with me. And take him down there with his application. That will fill my heart. To take him down there and say, toma, here it is. So I give him his paper. And 2 years later, because it's going to take about 2 years between the signing of the bill and the first moment somebody gets a benefit. It's going to take about 2 years. So what I want to be president, I want to run around the country filling out the form. And then after that, I want to go back and watch them all get their documents. Because that, to me, would be a very joyful process. Thank you for having me here.